Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy. So Victor Timely, a variant of Kang the Conqueror and He Who Remains, just had one of the most gruesome deaths in MCU history. So I want to talk about exactly what happened to Victor when he turned to spaghetti. And I want to talk about the destruction of the temporal loom, the TVA, and how our heroes escaped. And we're also going to talk about how we might just have witnessed the creation of every single Kang variant to come in Avengers, the Kang Dynasty, and Secret Wars. So in the comics, Victor Timely was not a variant of Kang. He was an alias that Kang took on after being defeated by the Avengers. After a humiliating defeat, Kang retreated back in time to 1901 and established the town of Timely, Wisconsin, where he started plotting his next attack. And we actually got a nod to Timely, Wisconsin in last week's episode.
My lab is in Wisconsin.
Go, go, go.
Lower taxes.
Anyways, we first met the MCU's version of Victor Timely in a post-credit scene from Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. Now, at the time, we theorized that he could actually be Quantumania's Kang in disguise after being sucked into his multiversal core at the end of the film. Now, we have speculated that when Kang was sucked into that core, he may have been thrown through time and space and wound up in the 19th or 20th century, making it to where he was now out of the quantum realm, but trapped in a time with very limited technology. But now, fast forward to season 2 of Loki, where we learned that this particular variant is not a Kang in disguise, but he was actually a child on the sacred timeline. And this child's destiny was altered when Ms. Minutes and Ravonna Renslayer gave him the TVA handbook, all at the direction of a now deceased He Who Remains. Now, after this reveal, we speculated that Victor Timely would be destined to become Kang the Conqueror and then eventually He Who Remains. But then this happened.
All around me are familiar faces.
But even though we just saw what appeared to be the death of Victor Timely, I still think that he is the original variant that leads to the creation of Kang and He Who Remains.
Hold on. What's that spaghetti thing? What's that all about?
Okay, well, we heard OB warn very early on that when exposed to temporal energy, you could be turned into spaghetti.
Well, have you heard about how if you fall into a black hole, you turn into spaghetti?
No.
Good. The less you know about that, the better.
This is in reference to what theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking has theorized would happen if one were to enter a black hole. Now, we've actually seen spaghettification happen before in the MCU in Quantumania. I got this! I got this, guy! Now, what is interesting is that in Quantumania, we saw this Ant-Man spaghettified in the presence of Kang's multiversal core. This was due to the temporal radiation that was beaming out from that core. And in this episode of Loki, we saw Victor Timely get spaghettified while trying to put what is likely an early prototype of that same multiversal core into the temporal loom. The point being that the temporal loom from Loki, the multiversal core from Quantumania, as well as its early prototype that Victor Timely holds, they're all connected. Not only are they all connected to one another, but they're all connected to black hole energy, and black hole energy is connected to timelines and the universe, like we saw in the opening of the season 1 finale. That season 1 opener showed us different voices from throughout the universe, and then we pulled out of that universe and saw 2 black holes, then entered the next black hole, basically implying that black holes are gateways to different universes.
Hey, you just gonna talk about movies all day? Do some work. I mean, the same movies have been on the shelf there for 2 years.
You know, I don't have to take this from you, Doug. I could get another job.
Doing what? Chin-ups?
No, I'm going to learn programming and back-end website development, and I am going to make so much money. According to Stack Overflow, the median salary for back-end developers in the US in 2023 was over $100,000, and I'm going to have the option to work from home and not in a desolate video store located at the end of time and space.
What? But you don't know anything about web development or nothing like that.
You're right, I don't, and that is why I am learning programming from Boot.dev. They're the sponsor of this video. Boot.dev makes it so easy to learn programming that I never thought I'd be able to learn, because they are essentially a programming RPG where you can earn XP, levels, achievements, and complete quests, and even compete on a global leaderboard if you're like me and you're motivated by competition. You see, Boot.dev understands that the best way to learn code is to make sure that you are never bored. The platform gets your hands on the keyboard and gets you writing a ton of code right away. So if you've ever wanted to learn coding, this is by far the best way to start, because you're going to learn by doing. You're going to learn back-end web development from start to finish in Python and Go programming languages, and the Boot.dev Discord community is there to help you if you ever get stuck on your coding challenges. So click the link in the description below and use our code to get 25% off your first payment for Boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or your first year, depending on the subscription that you choose.
Yeah, Boot.dev sounds like a pretty good deal, person.
Yes, it is. Now, back to what I was saying. Now, like I said, in Quantumania, we saw an Ant-Man get spaghettified, just like Victor Timely. But this was just one of many mighty Ant-Man. Remember that Ant-Man had found himself in a probability storm. Now, in the presence of the multiversal core, every choice Ant-Man made resulted in a variant of himself being created. We even saw a version of Scott Lang that never became Ant-Man and still worked at Baskin-Robbins. Now, I think the same is going to be true here for Victor Timely. While we saw Victor get spaghettified rather quickly, I think that in that moment, we also saw Victor's temporal aura enter a probability storm.
Wait, what's a temporal aura?
It's like your fingerprint in the time-space continuum. It's the reason why Victor Timely could access the panel that was created by He Who Remains, because they're both variants of each other.
Oh, okay, thanks. That makes sense.
Yeah, remember it's made very clear in this episode that Victor Timely and He Who Remains share the same temporal aura.
But first we need Mr. Timely's aura scan so we can get the blast doors open.
I think that Victor's temporal aura was thrown across all of time and space right when the temporal loom exploded. And in that moment, an infinite number of possible Victor Timely variants came into existence, an infinite number of Kangs. This probability storm was caused by Timely's exposure to temporal radiation, just like with Ant-Man and Quantumania.
Well, wait, why do you think that?
Well, remember that in the first episode of this series, when Loki's time slipping everywhere, they had to detach him from time with one of those pruning rods, which basically sent his entire essence all the way back out into that temporal storm that we saw in episode 1. But then Mobius was able to use basically a time magnet to extract his temporal aura and return him to the TVA. And I think we were shown that for a reason, and that something very similar happened to Victor Timely here. And that's why we think that this probability storm outside the TVA, crossed with the exploding temporal loom, could be the very event that created every single Kang variant. Just as Loki's essence was scattered across all of time and space, we think that in this single moment, we just saw every possible variant of Victor Timely thrown across all of space and time into the various timelines and universes being created as the multiverse expands. This means that every single Kang to ever exist will have stemmed from this original variant, Victor Timely. And this was all part of He Who Remains' master plan. In order for He Who Remains to come into existence, he knew that his original variant, Victor Timely, had to be exposed to a probability storm. That storm then creates not only the variant that will become He Who Remains, but all of the Kang variants that we saw in Quantumania. Now, we have theorized since episode 1 of this season that the entire TVA is in an Ouroboros, meaning that the same thing is going to happen again and again and again, creating a situation where cause and effect can be interchangeable. In fact, in this episode, we even heard Ouroboros himself say,
It's like a snake eating its own tail.
Mr. Ouroboros.
What do you mean cause and effect can be reversed?
well, it's called retrocausality. Take Terminator, for example. John Connor in the future sent Kyle Reese into the past. Kyle then slept with John's mother and she became pregnant with John, making it to where the effect, which is the creation of John Connor, like he is now retroactively the cause of his own creation.
Man, that's gross.
So we think that the same thing is happening here with He Who Remains. He Who Remains knew it all, meaning that he knew the one way he could come into existence. He knew that if it weren't for a branched timeline and the intervention of the TVA, Victor Timely would have never been Victor Timely. This young kid that we see grow into Victor Timely likely would have never gone the route of time travel and multiverse experimentation. Now we know this because this kid existed on the sacred timeline, and the sacred timeline had no Kang variants, meaning that this kid's path on the sacred timeline was never to become Kang. Now I'm sure he would have been a brilliant scientist for his era, but if not for the TVA handbook, he would have never dabbled in time travel. But this Victor Timely, who did get the TVA handbook, existed on a branched timeline, which started when Ravonna left him the book as a child. A branched timeline that then led to the creation of an infinite number of Kangs when Timely entered the loom. Like we've said from the start, this has all been part of He Who Remains' master plan. He knew that he needed to die at the hands of Sylvie. He himself said that he paved the path for them to find him.
Every step you took to get here, I paved the road.
Wait, how did he know that Sylvie had to kill him?
Because Victor Timely heard Sylvie say, "I killed this guy."
Someone killed He Who Remains.
He Who Remains' plan has been playing out in front of us from the second Loki escaped with the Tesseract in Endgame. Or really, you could take it even further back to when Sylvie was arrested as a child and was set down a path of revenge on the TVA. He Who Remains has known that in order for his kingdom and his throne to always come into being, the sacred timeline and the TVA would have to be destroyed. Their destruction is the end that causes the beginning.
Can you repeat that? I wasn't listening.
Okay, so in short, I think this is how it was always meant to go down. He Who Remains had to die so that the sacred timeline could branch. branch. Those branches then overwhelm the temporal loom and risk the destruction of the TVA. In order to get back into the now locked down temporal loom and save the TVA, Loki and the gang need the temporal aura of He Who Remains. So then they find the one and only variant of Kang, Victor Timely. And He Who Remains instructed Ms. Minutes and Ravonna to essentially create Victor Timely by leaving him the handbook. That created a branch timeline. And that new branch timeline allowed Victor Timely to create the first prototype of the multiversal engine core. Timely is then found, taken to the TVA, his temporal aura is used to open the gate to the loom, and it's there that Timely is exposed to a probability storm. Simultaneously, the expansion of the multiverse begins as the temporal loom explodes, thus creating every Kang variant, including the variant that I believe goes on to become this Kang from Quantumania, a Kang who battles his other variants for supremacy, wins the multiversal war, recreates the TVA and Miss Minutes, and eventually becomes He Who Remains.
This is wild.
So He Who Remains is back now?
No, not yet. We still have to see the big multiversal war, which we think is going to take place in Avengers the Kang Dynasty.
Okay, so what about Loki and all the people in the TVA? Do they all die when the loom explodes?
Well, Loki, OB, Mobius, Sylvie, B-15, and Casey could all escape by opening a time door and just leaving the TVA. And I think that may be how all of the TVA agents and personnel escape before getting spaghettified.
What about the mail truck people from episode 1? Do they have temp pads?
No, they are screwed.
Good, I hate mailmen. The stupid guys that come around your house all the time and they're dropping off mail and you're in your territory. Go away.
Exactly like that. Now, as for Ravonna, we see her get pruned. So she is now likely in the void at the end of time, as we saw here in the trailer for this season. And I think we may also see X5 prune himself to avoid being turned into spaghetti, and he will join Ravonna at the end of time.
I didn't think I'd see you again so soon.
Now, speaking of the trailers, we saw footage of Loki time slipping that we have yet to see this season.
Yeah, but I thought Loki's time slipping was fixed because his temporal aura was extracted, like you said earlier.
Yes, and as we theorized after episode 1 this season, it was indeed Loki's future self that pruned his past self, thus removing himself from every point in time. And Loki was then extracted by Mobius using a
temporal aura extractor.
Now, this extraction stopped Loki from time slipping, but the temporal loom being destroyed may be what restarts the time slipping and sends Loki back into the past, as we can see here.
Between the past and the present. Hello?
And this could give Loki the opportunity to save the TVA from destruction and perhaps even save Victor Timely from being spaghettified. And that would make sense because it would appear that Victor Timely still has a lot of his work to publish in his own century. Work that OB will study and learn from to write the TVA handbook. OB said he learned everything he knew from Victor Timely.
But I learned everything I know from a brilliant 19th century inventor named Victor Timely.
But I'm assuming that he learned from reading Timely's published works and not from actually meeting him. I assume that because OB recognized Mobius after 400 years, so I think he'd recognize Timely too if they had met before. Now, speaking of OB's encounter with Mobius 400 years ago, I think that could be hinting that Mobius himself will also travel to the past TVA. Mobius has no memory of meeting OB.
How long has it been?
How long has it been?
And that could be either because 1, Mobius's mind was wiped and OB's wasn't, or this Mobius has yet to travel to the past and meet the past OB. Remember, OB says that Mobius is the one who gave him his nickname, OB.
Ouroboros. Ouroboros.
But he calls me OB.
Yeah, I call him OB. That's like a nickname I have.
Wait, but didn't we see Loki give OB that nickname?
May I call you OB?
OB? I like that.
Yes, but that could have been an OB from before he met Mobius, and that OB then went on to have his mind wiped like all the other TVA agents, and then he gets the name again when he meets Mobius for the first time. Anyways, Mobius had no memory of ever meeting OB or going to the RNA, so I think that we're going to see Mobius travel into the past, and this scene that OB described will pan out exactly as OB remembers it.
Remember, you got off on the wrong floor and I told you it was the wrong floor?
Yes, because then I stayed for a little bit. He took me over.
No, you left immediately.
But how is Mobius going to get to the past?
Well, we know that Sylvie was able to kick Loki into the past via He Who Remains temp pad. So maybe that's how they all escape the destruction of the loom and get spaghettified. And then the remainder of this season could be Loki and the gang trying over and over to prevent the TVA from being destroyed. And perhaps they all begin to time slip just like Loki did when he was kicked into the past TVA. And let's remember, the temporal aura extractor was created more than 400 years ago by OB at the direction of Loki.
I got it. One temporal aura extractor.
So we could see the extractor come back into play, and they could use it to extract themselves from the time loom into this past version of the TVA, a past TVA that may now be under the control of the one Kang that was created when Victor Timely was spaghettified.
Person, I'll say it before I'll say it again. I miss those pretty yellow rocks.
Ah, come on, little buddy. This might be a little confusing, but it's a lot of fun. And the best part is, I could totally be wrong about everything I just said, and there could be an even cooler timey-wimey explanation on the way.
It's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Big shout out to the writer of this episode, Mr. Colton Ogburn. Let us know what you think. Do you think the spaghettification of Victor Timely created every single Kang variant we have seen in Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars? Will Loki, Mobius, and the gang travel back in time before the destruction of the temporal loom? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at either of us on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.